Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to Culturally Responsive Education, a step in the right direction for positive change and building a community of trust. This is being taped on April 12th, 2017. I'd like to welcome our guests. Our host is Dr. Debbie Almontaser, President of Bridging Cultures Group, a former New York City school principal and teacher. She is a community advocate, leader, and activist. Professor David Bloomfield, JD, Master of Public Administration. He is a professor of education leadership, law, and policy at Brooklyn College and the CUNY Graduate Center. He is the author of American Public Education Law. Bloomfield holds a certification as a teacher, principal, and superintendent, and was, as a parent advocate, president of New York's Citywide Council on High Schools. I'd like to welcome Natasha Capers. She is the coordinator of parent leader of the New York City Coalition of Educational Justice, CEJ, an organization that seeks to end inequities in New York City public schools. On Skype joining us today, we have Reverend Carolyn McCombs. She is executive director of the New Destiny Family Success Center and a service provider for the wraparound school services at the Senator Frank R. Lautenberg School in Paterson, New Jersey. Welcome. I'd like to also welcome Mpande Simelane. He is a native of South Africa and was educated in both South Africa and the United States. He is currently soccer coach at the United Nations International School. Welcome. Neme Alperstein. Ms. Alperstein is teaching with Primary Sources Teachers Network Mentor for the Library of Congress. She's a 28-year retired veteran teacher from the New York City school system and is completing her doctorate in STEM education. Ms. Alperstein was honored as a NASA Teacher of the Year. Welcome, Neme.
Thank you. Welcome.
I'd like to start with a statement. Culture is central to learning. It plays a role not only in communicating and receiving information, but also in shaping the thinking process of groups and individuals. A pedagogy that acknowledges and celebrates fundamental cultures, offering full, equitable access to education for students from all cultures. Culturally responsive education supports students in developing a lifelong appreciation for valuing cultural understanding in all settings. Dr. Debbie, I'd like to start with you. What is your opinion of culturally responsive education?
Thank you. And I want to thank all of our guests who are here today. This is so important for us to actually have a conversation about culturally responsive education. My opinion on culturally responsive education is one that really is important to incorporate into public education. We live in a city as well as a nation that is very, very diverse. And to actually be able to incorporate culturally responsive education in everything that we do in public education will provide children the opportunity to socially and emotionally develop healthy identities where they will actually become academically successful. When children are provided the opportunity to learn through meaningful and relevant curriculum that reflects who they are, their culture, their custom, their traditions, and is embracing of their identities, children can only then feel good about themselves, and when they feel good about themselves, they can certainly be more successful academically.
Very good, very good. Does anyone else have a comment on that?
I'd like to comment. I absolutely echo what was just stated, particularly because as we introduce in other cultures outside of our own, we begin to value others. And it's really important that we value not only our own culture, but the culture of others. So we begin to develop and grow together, particularly when we introduce these principles to children. They then begin to grow with an appreciation of others outside themselves. And I think it just makes for a much more healthy community.
Very good, very good. Are there any drawbacks to culturally responsive education?
Well, I don't believe that there are drawbacks in a curricular sense, but we're inviting, unfortunately, controversy when we have a culturally responsive curriculum. And I think that educators, whether that's at the teaching level or at the administrative level, have to really understand and be prepared to defend culturally responsive education really before the fact, to avoid controversy. But if the press gets involved, there will be blowback.
I see. Natasha?
Yeah, I would add that that has been our experience, that there, in theory, is no drawback. The drawback is that there are people who believe that my children do not deserve to see themselves, where their children see themselves daily throughout every course that they ever take. And my children deserve to have that same thing happen. My children deserve to see themselves reflected throughout a curriculum and to see others reflected throughout the curriculum. So like, even in your opening, like the one thing I would add is that it affirms our self-identity. We get to see ourselves. If you do not see yourself in the mirror, do you exist? So if I do not see myself in my own school setting, do I exist? Do I have value? If I can't see myself in the books that I'm required to read, why should I read them? Why should I be interested? So like the real drawback really is that the opposition believes that our children don't deserve that they deserve to continue to be vampires in their own curriculum because they don't get to see themselves.
And the value is twofold. It's seeing yourself in the world, but also realizing that there are others, and an understanding of diversity is necessary in this global society.
Professor, is there a legal point of view here?
Well, there's a legal point of view, both. I wish there was greater integration so that this exposure would just be part of the fabric of life. Too many of our children exist really in a cultural bubble because of the increasing amount of school choice and residential segregation and the lack of political will on the part of our leaders to have an integrated school system. But aside from that, very often parents, I think, misunderstand exposure to be endorsement. And we see that in the religious context. And there are any number of controversies going on right now where simple things like putting on a school play becomes a controversial matter because exposure to a folktale from another society that involves religion becomes misunderstood as proselytizing. This is happening right now in New York City in terms of a series of plays involving Muslim characters. Yeah. At the same time, if you put on Fiddler on the Roof, that'd be all right.
Cool.
So I think we have to recognize the legal parameters as well as, frankly, the ethical parameters that need to be considered.
I see. Dr. Debbie, from your point of view in the current political climate, could you speak to why this is important, CRE is important?
Absolutely. I think that CRE is really important because it gives us an opportunity to help children better understand the world that they live in, and to understand their neighbors, to understand their peers in a much deeper level. And the only way for that is if we provide the opportunity for them to learn about the various cultures that exist within their communities. What we see right now happening is so much standardized testing and preparing for those tests, and very little opportunity for children to build community among themselves and with their teachers. I can't begin to tell you how many teachers don't personally have a relationship with their children, with their students, to know about their family life, to know about their situation, to really be able to provide them that social emotional support where they can have somebody there that they can speak to. A prime example of this is on November 9th. 4 middle school children who basically were riding the train at 7:30 in the morning and started talking about the presidential race and our new president. And the children were all talking about how terrified they were that their mothers were going to be deported because they were undocumented. And one of these little girls started to cry. And so a mutual friend of a friend was on the train and simply started to comfort her and told her not to worry. I wonder, if these children went to school and had the opportunity to even have a conversation about the presidential race and to really process what they had experienced. We as adults needed to process what we had experienced the night before. And so there's that, element of really getting to know your children and what their fears are, what their concerns are. And I find that we don't have that opportunity to do that because we're so focused on standardized testing and graduation requirements. So we need to create an opportunity where there are moments where we can connect with our children and have our children connect with one another. And what it does, it actually, builds, tolerance, which I hate to use the word tolerance, but when children know one another, then they are more likely to stand up for one another versus being against one another. And so I think it's really crucial and critical to have CRE as a part of our education system. And I appreciate what you were saying, David, in regards to, the gray lines that exist there. And I think that if we have experts such as yourself and others who can actually help us understand what the parameters are, specifically within public education, then I think we'll be able to, to walk that fine line and do a good job in doing this work.
It's fun to walk the fine line.
Yes.
As educators, that's the wonderful challenge, to educate and not to be paralyzed.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Neme, you were a teacher for 28 years, and I know that you had a very interesting mix in your classes. Could you talk about that?
My populations were immigrant children, culturally diverse, and so perhaps in New York City we have more of that than perhaps outside the city. I'm not even sure that's true anymore. But I see, and I'm always puzzled at the pushback that you mentioned, because I see that people's experiences, their voices, their stories have a relevant place to the curriculum. Mm-hmm. It belongs in social sciences. It belongs in English language arts. I really don't understand how it couldn't be embedded in every single day in which points of the CRE have a place in actual curriculum, meeting standards, addressing preparation for testing. I don't see that as a separate piece at all. I don't understand why it's not completely woven into the fabric.
I absolutely agree with you. And your point brought me back to several years ago when a standardized test was actually provided to children. And after the children took the test, they had multiple questions about a narrative that was provided in the test that they had to respond to questions, and they were so totally removed from understanding what that was all about. It was something that you would typically find, in Midwest of America, not something that children in New York City would have an idea or an understanding. And so the kids were baffled by it and had to go to, the dictionary to look up the words. And that's what we're talking about, having meaningful and relevant curriculum is one to the experiences of the children. And your point is really well taken because it could certainly be incorporated into everything.
Exactly.
Correct.
I mean, the one thing I would add is that, throughout all of our research at CEJ, is that the one thing that has always been, that's always come back up is that CRE is actually more rigorous. It's more rigorous than what students are doing now. It requires deeper thinking. It requires multiple voices. You have to you have a 360 point of view. So, the cliche example is Columbus, right? You're not just listening to, he got on this boat, the Nina, the Pins, and the Santa Maria, and they discovered this and that, right? But you're actually, what was it like to be on the shores as a Native person and see these ships come up? That is a much deeper point of view. What was it like to be a crewman on that ship and watching things happen or being ordered to do things, right? That is a much deeper level of thinking and analysis and of questioning than what we require students to do currently.
And it's more experiential as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Reverend McCombs, could you tell us about your experience with the full-service community school? Why would this be important there, and what's the population that you serve?
Well, here in the city of Patterson, we are on 8 square miles, and we have over 86 different nationalities. So we are extremely diverse. I've been in Patterson now for 5 years, and my experience has always been an orientation to people from the world, and as well as enjoying the food, the culture. We live in a community very tight. We are such a piece of real estate. We have to coexist. But to the point that are being made, there is not a will. There's no will, a bureaucracy to really bring culturally relevant education into our curriculum. And I do see where teachers under extreme amounts of stress to meet core curriculum standards and all test requirements. What I'm finding is a lot of them are emotionally connected, not only from student, from the weekly. And it's really become much more rote than it should be, unfortunately. It's not experience that's fun, an educator anymore. But when I look about what we do, it's a full service community school. If we can bring wraparound services, we have had the opportunity to bring a number of cultural enrichment activities into the after-school environment. And every now and again, we do have an opportunity to kind of connect into the school. So some of the things we've done is we brought in mindfulness training to help children focus and really in touch with their feet. We in anti-bullying curriculum. We host cultural activities throughout the year where we celebrate all culture and connect parents and teen parents and to celebrate themselves and celebrate other cultures. So what I realized is that we've got to be prepared to fill the gap because our children need to be culturally aware, but not those that need to be validated and understand that they are valued as human beings as well. So that's kind of like my, my experience.
Thank you. Coach, could you tell us what it's like on the playing field in terms of...
I just have a question. Is anyone else hearing an echo from the reference?
Yeah. I'm hearing an echo.
Okay, right. Okay, so I couldn't hear everything you were saying, but I definitely want to touch on, it's very important to be, through cultural learning, one has to be empathetic. The lady was talking about it. And I see that on the playing field, it's a little different because kids or adults that I'm dealing with, once they start playing, whatever differences or ignorances they might have are completely gone. They're working on a common goal. So my perspective is really interesting. I see a lot of instant breakdowns of borders and differences within minutes, and then the squabbles or differences are usually about other things, more trivial. So that's one point I can touch on it. But I definitely think that through my upbringings and my exposures and experiences, that one has to be very empathetic towards other people's cultures and situations, and that's part of the problem maybe in not understanding a way to find solutions for the issue.
Very good. Thank you very much. At what age do we believe CRE should start?
Well, from the start.
From birth.
It's the same way we believe that language starts at birth, right? We believe that CRE, because children are taken in their culture. Their culture starts at birth. Like whatever rituals you do, however your naming ceremonies or how you name your children, all of those things can be cultural and are embedded in children from the moment they're born, even from the womb, right? So we have to figure out ways to elongate that process and to really bring it in. And so we recommend, like, from pre-K, from early childhood, that it has to be embedded early.
Okay, very good.
And when I was an elementary school teacher, we put on folk tales, and it was folk tales from South Africa, folk tales from Eastern Europe, modern American, children's literature, and that's the way to bring children. And it's mostly a problem of adults. I think the children can be easily moved in the direction of cultural diversity and respect. It's when the adults get involved that we have more problems.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right. In New York City schools, the number one place of birth for EELs, that's English language learners, outside the United States is the Dominican Republic. So that is a Spanish-speaking country, about 17%. The next one is China at 7%. And in EEL in New York City schools, they speak approximately they're from about 184 different places speaking over 100 languages. And there's a huge influx of immigrant children. How does the school system prepare for something like this?
Well, I think the way to prepare is simply look at the vast diversity that is within the public school system, and it's an opportunity to actually pull in parents and nonprofit organizations that are serving these communities to really become partners in helping schools to actually incorporate culturally responsive education. There is a wealth of information that's there. There are also for example, Channel 13 WNET that has, a variety of curricula that's on their website for people, for educators to actually use. So there is a wealth of knowledge of information that's out there, and nonprofit organizations that are certainly interested in partnering with schools. It's a matter of the school system seeing this as a priority. And I think the only way that we can really get them to see this as a priority is when they see that when children are socially and emotionally developing healthy identities, that academic success is the long-term result. When a child feels valued and celebrated, and they feel that they are part of the community because people understand them, where they come from, who they are, their identities, I think it really gives a great deal of value to the work.
I can definitely speak to that. I do hear the echo. I don't know if there's something that can be done. But the full service community school model has been very successful in New York City. There are over 200 full service community schools in New York City. And one of the findings from the schools, it is an evidence-based model that says that when the social and emotional needs of children are being met, they perform much better academically. So that research is already done, it's confirmed, and for the most part, New York City educators and administrators have embraced the model. And I believe that there is a great opportunity to connect in with nonprofits who are also partnering in with schools, and there is absolute evidence that kind of input from the community definitely improves academic outcomes. I can't imagine why educators wouldn't want to continue to grow this kind of partnership and expose more of the children and families.
Yeah. I also want to add
If I may just add a point to that, I find, for example, when I have new kids or even when I work with adults that are new to the community, the country and so on, depending on their personality, but as soon as they start playing after the game, they bond with people very quickly, and it's a great facilitator. So I'm in accord with what she's saying. It breaks down a lot of.
What is the role, what would you say the role of teachers in CRE? Obviously, there's a curriculum, but what is the personal role that they would play in this?
So for us, it's twofold, right? Because they will deliver curriculum, right? But they're also responsible a lot of times for building their own curriculum. So being able to build really strong curriculum, which is an overall issue, but also like one that is steeped in CRE, right? But then you have the pedagogical piece, right? How teachers are teaching, how they're delivering content, and that could be problematic. You can give a teacher the greatest curriculum on anything, but if they don't actually believe it, if they don't believe in CRE, if they don't believe that this has value, it can be delivered in a way that is just as problematic of not having it at all, right? So for us, we firmly believe that there has to be training process to undo bias. We all have bias. We all have implicit bias. It across the spectrum. I have it. You have it. It's there, right? We live in a society that is highly racist, highly sexist. So we have these innate things in us. And so it is our job as the adults, especially working with children, to undo all of that and to then connect it to how do I then deliver good content. So we always recommend that there are strong training programs and workshops that connect both the undoing the bias and strong CRE training with, and so what is your lesson plan? How does that look? And then going back, delivering that content, come back. How did that work out in your classroom? So that we are undoing not just the personal mindset, because you can undo an individual's mindset, but if they're not connecting that to what they're delivering in the classroom, then you just have a mismatch. And I think the other piece around like parents and how do we prepare, right? So family and parent engagement is so key. Like this is the place, like if you've never thought of like how can we engage families, like this is the place you want to engage families. Like I want to hear your stories. Come into the classroom, tell your stories. A few years ago, a group that we work with in District 9, they saw that their children were doing lessons around immigration. And so the teachers, and this is in the Bronx, mostly Hispanic, Latino, they were going to Chinatown to learn about immigration and to see it happen. And so the parents were like, we're immigrants too. Like, you could ask us, we can talk about it. And so they actually sat down and jointly built a curriculum around having students go home, talk to their parents, talk to their grandparents, learn about why did you leave your country, why did you come here, what was it like, and then have to do a report. They still went to Chinatown because there's value in that, right? But they actually started with their own personal experiences, so that way they're not disconnecting from it. They're not, oh, this is just something nice. But it's like, oh, this connects to my family's immigration story as well. Like, that's the real key, that it connects us and it doesn't erase us, right? So that's really key.
Professor, I wanted to ask you.
Well, I want to add one thing to what Natasha said, which is it's so important to have diverse faculty
Exactly.
in higher education, in teacher training programs, and in our schools, because, as Natasha said, one person can't do it all. We
Right.
have our biases, we have our backgrounds, we have our ignorances. And to have teachers with differing backgrounds and perspectives and knowledges is so important to bring culturally responsive curriculum alive in our children's life.
My question to you was, should this begin at university level, when people are going through teacher training, and to begin an understanding of this as an integrated part of what they're learning?
It's essential. I have no more to say about it than that, but going back to what I said, that's not only in terms of content, but one of the great failures is university faculty people of diverse backgrounds with PhDs who can teach in higher education, which is a horribly sort of biased and restrictive process. But that's really important.
But even those programs should be taught in a CRE perspective, right? So that you're not just like, well, and then when you go into your classrooms, you should do this. No, what I am doing in my classroom models how you should be in your classroom, right? Like how I am as a mother is supposed to model how I want my children to be, right? So we should expect that from our teaching colleges and in the universities. You should be teaching in the way in which you expect teachers to teach.
I would say that we at Brooklyn College, for sure, and I think throughout the CUNY system, we're at least now well aware of that challenge.
I think also what's really critical is for teachers to actually be equipped on how to build community in their classrooms. I find that nowadays there isn't much time in the beginning of the school year to actually build that sense of community and understanding and mutual camaraderie that should exist within a classroom where the kids can learn about one another, you know, through writing personal stories, sharing those personal stories, and connecting with one another on a deeper level, you know, through those stories. And if this were done and done really well, it would negate a lot of the bullying that exists, a lot of the fear-mongering that exists. I can't begin to tell you how many stories that you hear from children who come home and tell their parents, for example, Arab and Muslim children who say, one of my peers today called me ISIS. Someone said to me, what do you have in there? A bomb. I mean, these are the implicit biases, right? And the racist things that we see exist. And sadly, many adults don't even know or understand that some of these things are actually very inflammatory and are racist. And a lot of children get away with saying these things because no adult said anything, so it just seems like it's okay. And then you have these Arab and Muslim and South Asian students who simply think, okay, well, nobody said anything, I guess it's just something that I have to deal with. But if their peers really knew them and had a better idea of their culture and who they are and what they represent, I think some of this stuff would not happen.
Ms. Alperstein, how is technology playing a role?
I think it informs how you can implement this. For example, all my years I had huge cultural diversity, international families, many of whom the parents spoke primarily their own home language, often not enough English. And the question is, I see the parents as tremendous assets and wealth of opportunity. And many of my parents were working 2 jobs. They didn't have time to come into the classroom, so the technology afforded tremendous chance. For example, we were sharing stories on holidays, and depending on where you were from the world, that holiday may not be your holiday, or you may have a different holiday. And a child came to me and said, I don't think my parent can participate. I said, do your child have a cell phone? Yeah. Skype the parent in for 20 minutes. Parent doesn't speak English. Well, you're our translator. And so the story can come through the child through a technological way. Another one, I said, well, tell us, could you write down your experiences of coming to the United States? They said, right? We had a camera. Can we share our video? So we had pictures of children getting off the plane when they were infants. And what that really did for the children was the peer-to-peer relationships dramatically improved. The parents were thrilled because they were included without having to leave the job. That interview was done on a lunch break for the parent. And you'd be surprised at how receptive and how personal the relationships can become based on that. We Skyped them in on a smart board. And when we didn't have that, we did it on a computer through the DOE network. So those opportunities have only expanded. And I think it's primary to create a welcoming tone.
Mm-hmm.
You are welcome, we acknowledge the history, and we see where it has a place in what we're learning every day. We don't take 40 minutes out for CRE. CRE is in social studies. CRE is in science. Anybody win a Nobel? The Americans don't really have a lock on it. They do well, but what are the historical contributions to the current country that they are in, so that they see their place in this society instead of abandoning where they come from to adopt a new one. They see its very important value, and the parents then do too. You'd be amazed how well we ate with wonderful foods. One of the parents tried to cook something from my culture. I said, don't do that. You have better food than I can make at home. Could I have something that you made? And before you know it, the whole school got in on that. And the child was just so excited. Must have said 3 words in September, maybe. By June, I made a point of not asking him to stay quiet because I had gotten so far along in getting him to engage. But those are opportunities that are there, and I cannot imagine how we do not see our families as powerful assets in just about every aspect of what you do in the classroom.
Coach, how do you engage families in the sports arena with your either your students or with your games? How does that become a leveling playing field?
On multiple levels. Recently, I had an event, just a public event for adults. It was open, but it was very special to me because I had a complete family playing in a game on the same team. It was a mother, father, and their son. And they're all from New York, but the group itself is pretty diverse. And for me, that was a very special day. I had a really deep conversation with them after it. I just wanted to touch back on one thing, the food aspect, because even, for example, after a game or after a game, we might all meet up and go to someone's house where the kids get together and exchange, food from their respective backgrounds. And it's really interesting for me to watch them. Oh, what is this? And then they talk about it. So it really gets the conversation going. So I was going to suggest, but you guys already started talking about it for events or for classroom situations, like maybe having weekly, display of food from one region and so on and so forth. And coming back to the other question you asked me, actually, I'd like some feedback on the food thing. Like, I don't know if it's something that's been considered introducing or maybe changing menus in schools to once a season be more international, having people come and really talk about it. Because if you look at the history of people's travels and languages, nations that share bordering tongues, the foods that come out of it, there's a lot of history of food and cultural experiences and so on. So I'm sorry, I went off on a tangent there.
That's okay. Reverend McCombs, tell us about the parent engagement, the challenges in parent engagement in the population you serve.
Glad you asked. I hear thank you. One of the things that we have recognized is clearly parent engagement is essential. And so some of the things we've had to navigate has been making the school environment welcoming for parents. And when parents have a feeling that their presence in the school is not welcomed, it makes it difficult to engage them. So we've been, working on ways to improve that, and it is improving. But one of the other things that has to happen, I think that's critical, is that you have a diverse staff. So if you have people from Syria, you have people from the Dominican Republic, you have people from Haiti, all these diverse places, your staff should reflect that. And there have been times when parents will come in, they don't speak English, and there are some serious concerns going on with the children, and there may not be anyone there who speaks the language. And therefore, now the parents are, threatened, and it's a very frightening situation. So I know we're making strides in terms of making the staff reflective of the ethnic makeup in the community. And what we're finding is when parents show up and, oh my goodness, there's someone here who's from the Dominican Republic, they understand me, they get where I'm coming from. And so now that parent starts to open up more. And, you know, we had incidences where parents were bringing the children to school late. And one of the principals happens to be Dominican, spoke to another parent who was Dominican, and in a very nice way said, you know, we need you to make sure, you know, your child gets here on time. And so for a couple of times, you know, she was still having an issue, but eventually she gained the respect and trust of that parent, and now that child is there every day on time. So it's really important to be able to relate to the parents where they are. Back to the cooking experience, we had a great experience. We have a curriculum where we teach cooking from around the world, and we happened to host this training in the community, and we invited a Syrian refugee family. They never left their home because they just didn't feel part of that community, but here they are living in the community in isolation. So we reached out and said, you know, we'd really like you to be a part. Long story short, they had the time of their lives, and they walked away saying, wow, we're now introducing some of these foods into our diet, and they also shared some of their cultural food, and others who participated are also now using, you know, some of their recipes. So a lot can happen when you have those types of positive exchanges.
And on that, and on the parent piece, like, teachers aren't trained on how to do good parent engagement, right? There's no like parent engagement 101. And so you then enter a school, and then you're just like, well, engage parents, and people are always like, I don't know how to do that. And so we uplift several models that are steeped in research, that are research based and proven, that create strong relationships. So one is academic parent-teacher teams, and the other one is parent-teacher home visits, where we actually get teachers to come off of what we call teacher turf, which is the school, and go into parent turf. And it doesn't necessarily have to take place in a home. It has to take place anywhere the family feels comfortable except the school. Mm-hmm. You have to come on to the turf that the family is the most comfortable, because now I get to sit in relationship with you. How are you doing? Get to know you, and it's not, well, what's under your table and what's in your refrigerator and your kid failed. It's, what are your hopes and dreams for your child? Who are you as a parent? Like, I want to know more about you so that we're building strong relationships, and that's at the core of what CRE is about. It's like, how do we do that? And so we talk about doing that all the time and really uplifting those models. Academic parent-teacher teams brings the whole class of parents into the room together to learn academic skills to help their students at home. Because often it's like, well, make the kid read this book, read it, right? No one's ever like, well, this is how you sit down and this is what you do, and this is, I'm not a teacher, I don't know how to get them to memorize all these words, right? I don't know how to explain the prefix to the root to the suffix and why that's so important. I don't know that. You're the teacher. So now I get to come into the room where all of the other parents build that strong community, and now the teacher is telling me, oh, this is why this is important. This is how you do this. This is how you work at home with your student over the next X amount of weeks. And then you see the growth. And then now I know you. And now I'm like, when I see you in the playground with your child, I can have conversation. Right?
And it has to be multidimensional. You know, it became a joke sort of in the 60s that you would have, you know, culturally diverse food day, or, you know, sing the songs of the other culture, or the holiday. It has to be multidimensional. It has to be
layered,
embedded in the academics. It has to be embedded in the family relationships. It has to be embedded in the recreational opportunities. If you just do one and not the others, it will be phony. And it has to be about our cultures and not about tokenism.
Right. It can't just be the heroes and holidays. It's not about adding another poster to the wall. It's not about, now we're going to talk about this extra holiday. It's deeper. It's deep in something much deeper. And it's actually about uncovering the truths of who we are as individuals and about our cultures, and then sharing that with one another. But also, we live in a country that actually we need to uncover some of those truths of who we are as Americans or living in America, and having real identity and having real strong knowledge about what does that mean in terms of our laws. What does that mean in terms of how we treat one another? Thanksgiving was, in many classrooms, a lost opportunity to talk about some really deep things. So you have the history that is taught about Thanksgiving, steeped against Standing Rock, and the violation of treaty, right? The violation of law. The United States violated the sovereign nation, right? That was there. And that is a lost opportunity to talk about it in a way that's not just we're just going to talk about current events.
Rhetorical,
right. We're going to steep this in what is our duty around treaties and law and respect for other nations, because we wouldn't go into Canada and do that, right? But we'll do that to indigenous people. Why is that okay? And really uncovering that, and not just in a way that I want to talk about race or racism, but actually we're going to have to actually talk about how do we treat the law of our country, because treaties are laws.
And that's a really good example talking about Thanksgiving, because one of the missed opportunities, again, is teachers simply asking, do you celebrate Thanksgiving? Because you would get a variety of answers from students in the classroom of kids saying, well, no, we don't celebrate Thanksgiving because we give thanks every day. And that is actually a response that many American Muslim families give as a response in saying, we give thanks to God every day. We don't have one designated day in the year that we give thanks. And so, that's another opportunity of learning about the various cultures within your school community, your classroom,
And
for
to
kids.
create dialogue.
Exactly.
Right. And to acknowledge that Thanksgiving is an American holiday. It's not a worldwide holiday. So if you have a diverse population, most of them a lot of those students probably did not always celebrate Thanksgiving. Or their parents didn't. I have lots of friends who are just like, that wasn't a thing. We started doing that because we got the day off, and y'all do that. Like, we cook on that day because y'all cook on that day, and that's it. But it's not their holiday, and it's barely my holiday. Like, so really acknowledging, do you celebrate Thanksgiving? No, why? Why not? And if you're an American who doesn't, because I don't prescribe to celebrate Thanksgiving, why is it that as a Black American I don't celebrate Thanksgiving? Why don't my children see that as an important thing to do? And that is actual strong conversation.
Very much so. Neme, I wanted to talk about technology. Is it building bridges or putting up walls?
Well, everything you've mentioned can be enhanced through the use of perhaps assignments in technology. In my experience, if you give a student a topic to research, but you give new guidelines, you say, we don't want the handwritten version. Could you give us a video of it? And you can put in pictures, and you give the guidelines of what you can include. You'd be surprised. And one of the, I said, see if your parent wants to play a role in it. And the reason I did that was very specific. The parent helped with the video. That means you have parental permission, and they uploaded it to Vimeo, where we could then view it as a class. And so what that did was allowed us, number one, the students now develop a portfolio with that level of diversity. We had one where they created a cookbook. Now, the parent did not want to be subject to the curriculum demands. It was just too tough. The parents didn't speak English, but the child could read the cookbook and then created the comparable cookbook and recipes in English while they shot it in their kitchen. And then they edited it. So I said, how did you edit it? They said, oh, it's on the cell phone now. There's an app. It's free. So the next thing you know, I come in, and 6 kids said, we have recipes that we have our parents cooking, and we translate, and we're doing, we have the food, and we even brought some of the food for the class to share. and we all viewed maybe 8 or 10 videos that had been posted with the parents. Now you have the parent engaged. Now the parent is talking about what they celebrate. Now you hear what is important to them, and you really don't want just the peripheral, it's, this holiday, let's give 2 sentences about it and we're celebrating. And maybe it's okay to explain why you don't celebrate, but let's hear what you do celebrate.
Right.
Put the video up. Some people did PowerPoint, some did the videos on their cell phones are very, very prominent. And then also the Skype feature, where you can get people at different locations who really can't get to where you are. And that's where you get to give voice to people who may not have had voice, and maybe even change minds about and change perceptions. It's really important to do that.
I'd like to, in our wrap-up, is anyone aware of school systems that have CRE and how it is working out?
So there is some, even in New York City, there are small pockets of good work being done. ESI, the Expanded Success Initiative, is doing some good work. There's some, and they're like small pockets all across the city. There's some, I was actually really lucky to visit an indigenous charter school in New Mexico, whose population is more than half Native, and they're a high school, and they're doing incredible work there because they're steeped in cultural relevance. Like, their students read indigenous authors before they start to read the Shakespeare and all of that stuff, because they want them to have a strong identity because then they can take themselves and just, read this really great book and then relate to it and not just feel erased in it, right? That they teach 4 indigenous languages to students, and that they really do the strong, hard work. So it's happening. Ethnic studies has been a thing that's been bubbling up across the country, especially like on the West Coast. It has taken roots and taken off. And so people see the importance of it. People are also seeing the importance of student voice in it, that we have to allow space for students to talk about their experiences. And actually like centering students in the learning experience. And then just the piece on the outside influences, and that this actually helps to counter a lot of the outside influences that are happening. Students are hearing crazy stuff and coming from our reader, right? Students didn't wake up one day and start chanting "Build a Wall" because they thought it was fun and cute. They heard our president say that, and the influence that has on students, because that is the ultimate checkpoint, right? Like, the president says it, so who's refuting it? Who's pushing back on it in a real way? And students just hear these things, or they hear something and it's, oh, well, that was just a joke, that was just funny, and it's not. And if you don't have adults who are strong enough in their core to push back and to say that's not right, and then do the investigation of why you think that that's okay, then you will have a generation of young people who think that this is okay, and it's not. And even amongst the racial makeup, right? Even Black students doing it to other Black students, or Hispanic students, or Muslim students, even within oppressed groups, that cannot be allowed to happen.
I also want to add to Natasha's information in regards to where actually culturally responsive education is actually being implemented. I also want to say that right here in New York City, for schools that have been using the Teachers College Reading and Writing Institute as the reading and writing curricula, back in the day when I actually was a staff developer training teachers in reading and writing, it was all about your experiences, reading multicultural literature that helped you connect with other cultures, your own culture, writing from your own experience, questioning what you're reading through your own experience. That is a perfect model for culturally responsive education, because it starts with you and how you see the world and how you connect world-to-world text, text connections. Just really being able to look at something holistically and connect it to your life and experiences is something really powerful. And it's been done. It's just simply not been called, culturally responsive education.
And it's done every day in classrooms. Let's be really clear. Like, this work is done every day. One of the things that I've learned is that we are all responsive to a culture. We are all responsive to one. It's just to whose we are responsive to.
Exactly.
So there are students who are sitting in classrooms every day who are reading about themselves, learning about themselves, gaining positive self-identity about themselves, we're seeing their cultures reflected, having their language celebrated. It's just that it's usually not students of color. That we center whiteness. And that we have to be really clear that we have to find ways of decentering whiteness in spaces so that we can have the room for cultural responsiveness.
Does anyone from Skype have a comment on this topic?
So, one thing that, troubles me a lot in this conversation, and not specifically what we're saying, but something that I observe that I think is a real barrier is the stark division between the haves and the have-nots. And the fact is that our society is still very much redlined.
Yep.
And there are people who can't get out of their circumstance of poverty and lack without getting a hand up in some kind of way. And I believe all of this is really rooted in cultural awareness and education. And somehow we have got to bridge this divide, because I think it's going to be extremely difficult for us to have a elevated cultural awareness in our society as long as this deep divide between haves and have-nots exists.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, well, I'd like to thank everyone for participating. I'd like to thank our host, Dr. Deborah Almontaser, Neme Alperstein, Professor David Bloomfield, Natasha Capers, Reverend Carolyn McCombs, Mpande Simelane, and I am Patrice Samara from Triumph Communications Group. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank
you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.